May 12, 1967, Thu Bon River Valley, Quang Nam Province, South Vietnam. The sun had barely pushed above the jungle canopy, yet the air already clung to the skin like a damp, smothering blanket. Mist drifted low across the slow-moving surface of the Thu Bon River, turning the far bank into a ghostly blur. From the muddy shoreline, First Lieutenant Daniel Deke Harrington crouched beside a cluster of reeds, his flak vest soaked with humidity and nerves. The jungle behind him remained deceptively quiet, too quiet for a region known for its sudden violence. He could feel the weight of that silence, like the entire valley was holding its breath. Ahead, a narrow aluminum assault boat bobbed gently in the current. Its bow was pointed toward the opposite bank, where a patchwork of nipa palm and tangled vines concealed what might be nothing or everything. Corporal James Wilcox, the team's radio man, wiped a bead of sweat off his temple with the back of his sleeve. "Sir," he muttered, adjusting the handset on his pack. "If they're out there, they already know we're here." Lieutenant Harrington didn't answer. He simply lifted his binoculars and scanned the water one last time. No ripples, no movement, no glint of metal, nothing to betray a hidden enemy. But after 6 months in this sector, experience had taught him that the Viet Cong rarely revealed themselves until the perfect second, usually when your boots were underwater and your rifle's barrel was pointing the wrong way. The patrol 12 men from Bravo. Company 1st Battalion 5th Marines assembled at the riverbank in 2 staggered lines. Each man carried the damp, earthy smell of jungle, slogging sweat oil mud and the faint, metallic tang of weapon lubricant. Their gear clinked softly, M16 magazines, claymore bags, canteens, and coils of rope. Every sound seemed too loud. Sergeant Thomas Riker, the squad leader, tapped his helmet and whispered, "Mount up," quietly, eyes on the tree line. The Marines worked fast, stepping into the boats in practiced silence. Harrington climbed in last, gripping the gunwale to steady himself. The river was warm, almost hot, and the surface lapped gently against the hull in a rhythmic, unnerving silence. They pushed off. The moment the current caught the boats, the men instinctively lowered their heads. The river widened around them like an open grave exposed to both banks. Every second on the water felt like a minute stretched thin and pulled taut. Private First Class Miguel Ortega manned the front of Harrington's boat M16, resting across his knees, thumb brushing the safety switch. He swallowed hard. "Sir, I hate this river. Feels like it's staring at us." Harrington didn't disagree. A deep, throaty thrum echoed downstream somewhere far. Maybe a sampan engine, maybe just the river, shifting against submerged rocks. Hard to tell. The jungle swallowed and reshaped sound in strange ways. As they neared the midpoint, the river thickened with floating debris, driftwood clusters of reeds and water hyacinth drifting lazily by. It looked harmless. But every Marine on that boat knew the history. Explosives, punji stakes, even trip-wired grenades had been hidden inside rafts of vegetation before. Sergeant Riker raised a hand, signaling a brief pause in paddling. The boats drifted, carried by the mild current. "Something ain't right," he whispered. The birds had stopped. No chirps, no rustling wings. Just the sound of the water and the collective heartbeat of 12 men who suddenly felt very, very exposed. Harrington turned toward the opposite bank, its foliage still shapeless behind the haze, and felt a cold knot tightening in his gut. His instincts screamed at him, the kind of instinct forged only after months of watching good men vanish in seconds during river crossings. The kind of instinct that kept you alive. He scanned the tree line again. Nothing moved, but the absence of movement was itself a warning. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw a faint flash of reflection like sunlight bouncing off something metallic buried deep in the brush. It came and went in less than a heartbeat. Harrington inhaled sharply. "Riker," he whispered. "Port side, 11 o'clock. You see that?" Riker followed his gaze, squinting. There, another glint. Higher this time, then gone. Every Marine froze. Corporal Wilcox's hand hovered over his radio handset. Ortega's knuckles whitened around his rifle, The boats drifted unpowered, suspended between both banks with nowhere to run. The river felt suddenly colder. Harrington wanted to shout paddle back, but he couldn't. The sound would echo, and if the enemy wasn't fully aware of them yet, that would confirm their exact position. They were halfway across too far to retreat, too far to push forward, and with almost no cover, the worst possible place. Then a branch shifted on the far bank. Not from wind, not from wildlife, something deliberate. Harrington's pulse hammered. He gripped the boat's edge, breath-tightening sweat sliding down his cheek like cold rain. And in that split second before the world erupted, he realized they weren't crossing the river. They were already inside the ambush. The first muzzle flash on the north bank was a tiny spark, almost beautiful against the mist right before the crack of an AK-47 ripped the morning open. Later, Harrington shouted "Contact front" at the exact moment a storm of bullets churned the river around the boats. Sheets of water blasted upward as rounds tore into the current, punching holes through the aluminum hulls with sickening metallic thwacks. Ortega squeezed off a burst, but his rounds climbed uselessly into the treetops as the boat rocked violently. "I can't get a bead," he yelled, fighting to steady his rifle. The Viet Cong had chosen their timing perfectly. The Marines were mid-crossing, mid-river, mid-helpless. Harrington felt the truth hit him harder than the gunfire. They were pinned in the worst fighting position possible, on open water, no cover, no maneuver space, and the current pulling them like wounded fish. A rocket-propelled grenade hissed from the foliage, streaking toward the second boat. RPG starboard. Wilcox screamed. The explosion rocked the valley, a column of water and shrapnel erupting skyward. The boat vanished in a geyser of spray. When the water settled, 3 Marines were flailing, one screaming, one eerily silent one trying desperately to keep his gear from dragging him under. Harrington didn't think he acted. "Get them out, paddle move." Rounds cracked past his helmet, snapping leaves from overhead branches as he swung his rifle toward the muzzle flashes hidden in the dense vegetation. He fired 3 careful shots, each one aimed, each one swallowed by the jungle without confirmation. The remaining boat rocked dangerously as Riker and Private O'Malley hauled a wounded Marine from the water. Blood poured from the man's thigh in pulsing arterial bursts, staining the river in spreading tendrils. O'Malley pressed a hand against the wound, screaming over the gunfire. "Pressure on it. Hold on. Stay with me." Another volley erupted from the opposite bank, this time from behind them. Harrington whirled. More muzzle flashes. More gunfire. The Viet Cong were firing from both sides. A classic kill zone. They had let the Marines get deep enough into the water that retreat or advance would be suicide. And now the alternating fields of fire overlapped perfectly, corralling the boats into a vortex of bullets. Harrington felt the boat jerk as 2 rounds slammed into its side. Water rushed through a widening hole near his boot. "We're taking on water," Ortega shouted. "Keep paddling," Riker barked back. A sharp, metallic ping rang off Harrington's helmet, stunning him. For a moment, the world muted into a distant roar. He blinked rapidly, vision swimming as a second bullet sparked off the gunwale inches from his hand. The river suddenly felt shallow, not in depth, but in safety. As if the water itself could no longer protect them, could no longer hold them. It was simply a killing field. Wilcox crouched low, radio handset pressed to his lips. "Bravo. Actual, this is Bravo, 2-1. We're in a crossfire, grid 452. The radio hissed, crackled, then went silent. A round had severed the antenna clean off his pack. "Damn it!" Wilcox slammed the handset down, ducking as a burst passed overhead. The current pushed them closer to the center of the kill zone. They had seconds to react or none. Through the chaos, Harrington spotted it, a narrow break in the reeds on the southern bank. A natural slipway, not much, but something somewhere bullets weren't currently hitting. He cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted over the deafening roar of gunfire. That gap south bank, hard left now. Riker and Ortega threw their weight into their paddles. The boat lurched, turning slowly, far too slowly. Every second felt like trying to steer through molasses. Another burst hammered the hull. One round tore open the bow. Water gushed in. The boat dipped dangerously nose first. Harrington grabbed the nearest Marine. "If she goes under, ditch your packs and swim. Don't sink with your gear." As if hearing him, a bullet ripped through Wilcox's radio pack, sending shards of metal and plastic spraying. Wilcox cursed, ripping the smoldering remains free and tossing them overboard. The river suddenly surged as the current seized their half-sinking craft and pulled them sideways toward the gap in the reeds. Almost there. Almost. Then a Viet Cong machine gun opened up from a camouflaged position on the northern bank, its tracer rounds stitching across the water like red-hot needles, walking their way directly toward the Marine's floundering boat. Harrington's stomach dropped. If that gun locked onto them for even 2 more seconds, the entire patrol would be cut in half. He raised his M16, took a single, steadying breath despite the chaos, and aimed at the exact spot where the tracers originated. His finger tightened on the trigger. Harrington squeezed the trigger in the same instant the machine gun swept toward the boat. His first burst disappeared into the foliage. The second found something solid, a spark, a jolt, a sudden break in the rhythm of tracer fire. The gun hiccuped, then stopped. A shout echoed from the tree line, followed by frantic movement. Whether he'd hit the gunner, the assistant, or just smashed the weapon's feed tray, Harrington didn't know. But the brief lull bought them the seconds they needed. "Paddle, all of you!" Riker roared. The boat, half filled with river water, groaned as the men heaved their paddles in desperate strokes. Every muscle trembled with effort. Bullets still cracked from both banks, but the concentrated stream of tracers had vanished, giving them a thin corridor of survival. The reeds loomed ahead, rustling as the current pulled them into the narrow gap. As soon as the bow hit vegetation, Ortega leapt out, boots sinking into warm mud. He grabbed the gunwale and dragged, teeth gritted, pulling the sinking boat farther into the cover of the marsh. Harrington and Riker followed, helping haul the wounded man over the side. The reeds swallowed them, casting a green, muffled shadow around the patrol. Gun smoke drifted through the air like ghostly ribbons. Behind them, bullets slashed through the river, but the thick lattice of reeds absorbed most of the incoming fire. They'd bought momentary concealment, but nothing close to safety. "Get low," Harrington ordered. "Check weapons, count bodies, move." The men crouched, sucking air between their teeth, some shaking, some whispering quiet curses. Private O'Malley cradled the wounded Marine, now pale and drifting in and out of consciousness. Harrington grabbed the man's wrist. "Weak pulse. Too weak. Tourniquet now," he said. O'Malley nodded, wrapping the strap tight around the thigh, twisting until the bleeding slowed to a sluggish seep. The Marine groaned, then went limp again. Corporal Wilcox, panting hard, crawled up beside Harrington. "Sir, we got 7 men left who can fight. Radio's dead, ammo's half gone, and they're still out there." As if in response, an incoming burst ripped through the outer layer of reeds. One round zipped so close to Harrington's ear he felt the heat. The reeds quivered, raining shredded leaves onto the patrol. "We can't stay here," Riker said, jaw clenched. "They'll flank us." Harrington knew he was right. The Viet Cong would circle, tighten the noose close off every escape route. They had the terrain, the numbers, and the advantage. The Marines had only a handful of rifles, the mud at their backs, and a dying man bleeding out on the riverbank. But something else caught Harrington's attention, something subtle, something the untrained eye might miss. Beneath the gunfire, beneath the shouting, beneath the hiss of the river, footsteps, soft, careful, pressing into wet earth, multiple sets, moving close. Contact left. Ortega whispered sharply, raising his rifle. Harrington snapped around. Silhouettes moved through the reeds, dark shapes slipping between stalks with the fluid precision of hunters. A grenade arced toward them. "Down," Riker bellowed. Harrington tackled Wilcox, forcing him into the mud as the grenade detonated 3 meters away. The blast lifted a spray of mud, reeds, and river water, slamming several Marines sideways. The wounded man screamed, clutching his leg as fresh blood spilled through the tourniquet. The enemy was closing in. Harrington rolled onto his stomach, propping his rifle against a clump of reeds, eyes locked on the approaching shapes. He fired. One shadow fell. Another ducked away. The reeds quivered violently as suppressed AK rounds tore through them inches above the Marines' heads. Ortega and O'Malley returned fire in short bursts, the chatter of M16s cracking against the deeper thump of AKs. Empty brass pinged into the mud. Riker crawled beside Harrington, voice ragged. "Sir, if they push through this screen, we're done." "They won't," Harrington said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. "We hold, we fight, we survive long enough to break out." Wilcox shook mud out of his eyes. "Break out where, sir?" Harrington didn't answer. Because he didn't know. The reeds rustled again closer this time. The Viet Cong weren't probing anymore. They were advancing, coordinated, steady, confident. A shadow rose directly in front of Ortega, so close, Harrington saw the glint of the man's bayonet. Ortega fired point blank. The shadow collapsed, but 5 more moved in behind it. Riker grabbed Harrington's shoulder. "They're all around us." Harrington steadied his rifle, mud dripping down his arms, breath burning in his lungs. "Then we stand," he said quietly. "Right here." He took aim at the advancing line, pulled the trigger, and the reeds exploded with movement. The reeds thrashed violently as figures lunged through the green curtain, rifles raised bayonets gleaming dull silver in the filtered sunlight. Harrington fired reflexively, each burst punching new openings in the wall of foliage. Ortega shifted beside him, releasing a controlled 3-round burst that dropped another attacker mid-stride. But for every Viet Cong fighter that fell, 2 more seemed to press forward. The air thickened with the sharp tang of cordite and the earthy scent of torn vegetation. Mud splashed upward as bullets chewed the ground around the Marines, snapping reeds hissing past their helmets, kicking dirt into their faces. Riker slammed a fresh magazine into his M16 fingers, trembling just slightly. "They're trying to overrun us," he snarled. "We hold this line, or we die here." Harrington scanned the reeds left, right, center. Movement everywhere, shifting shadows, whisper quick footfalls on wet soil. The VC were spreading, testing the perimeter like wolves circling an injured animal. "Shift right 10 meters, Harrington ordered. "On me." The Marines dragged themselves through mud and tangled vegetation, using the reeds for what little cover they provided. The wounded man moaned softly as O'Malley and Wilcox lifted him, carrying him between them each step, a battle against sinking boots and the sucking grip of the marsh. "Keep him low," Harrington hissed. A burst of automatic fire ripped through the vegetation inches above O'Malley's head. He ducked instinctively, nearly dropping the wounded Marine before regaining his grip. The sound of splashing footsteps grew louder. Closer. Riker raised his rifle and fired a single carefully aimed shot. A scream followed somewhere in the reeds. "Left flank," he barked. Harrington pivoted and fired again, forcing 2 advancing silhouettes to retreat deeper into the foliage. But the enemy wasn't retreating overall. They were repositioning, coordinating, closing. A sudden crack overhead made Harrington look up. A bullet zipped through a palm frond, sending it spiraling downward. "Sniper," Ortega shouted. Up in the trees, another shot followed this one, striking the mud inches from Harrington's boot. The VC weren't just pressing, they were tightening the net. Harrington felt the sinking realization staying put meant being slowly ground down. Ammunition was low. The wounded wouldn't hold. The reeds that shielded them now were temporary cover, nothing more than flimsy floating shadows that could break at any second. He forced his breathing steady, wiping sweat and mud from his eyes. "We move south," he said. "Follow the marsh line until we hit real cover. A ditch, a log jam, anything." Wilcox looked up sharply. "So south leads closer to their positions on the east bank." "Not directly," Harrington replied. "There's a narrowing in the river about 300 meters downstream. High mud walls on both sides. If we can reach that, they lose their firing angle." Riker nodded. "It's a gamble. It's survival." A burst tore through the reeds to their right, sending stalks flying. One Marine grunted as a round grazed his arm. Blood splattered across his sleeve. He held his weapon tighter. "Move," Harrington snapped. They advanced, crouched, almost crawling weapons, ready boots sloshing through muck. Every movement was a gamble. Each step might draw fire. Each rustle might reveal their position. Behind them, the VC surged. Shouts in Vietnamese cut through the reeds, harsh and urgent. The Marines didn't need a translator to understand the meaning. The enemy had identified the direction of their escape and was shifting to block them. Harrington fired a burst over his shoulder, forcing a cluster of figures to dive behind a twisted clump of vegetation. "Keep going. Don't stop unless I say." O'Malley slipped, nearly falling face first into the mud as he dragged the wounded Marine. Ortega grabbed his vest and hauled him upright without missing a step. The reeds gave way suddenly to a darker patch of marsh, thicker, deeper. Mud sucked at their boots like living hands. Riker swore as his legs sank to the knee. Harrington grabbed his webbing and pulled him free. Gunfire intensified behind them, closer, harder, more concentrated. "They're right on us," Ortega shouted. Wilcox looked back, eyes wide. "Sir, if they flank left, they cut us off." Harrington saw it too, movement curling around the reeds like a tightening fist. They were running out of time, but ahead, just ahead, the wall of reeds thinned. The sound of rushing water grew louder. A channel, narrow and steep-sided, carved through the marsh like a scar. "There," Harrington pointed. "Into the channel. Go." The patrol stumbled forward, driven by adrenaline and the raw instinct to survive. The reeds tore at their uniforms. Mud clung to their boots. The wounded Marine groaned, losing consciousness again. Just as they reached the edge of the channel, a burst of gunfire tore through the reeds to their immediate left, so close Harrington felt the heat on his cheek. The enemy had caught up. He spun, raising his rifle. But a VC fighter was already bursting through the reeds, bayonet extended, eyes fierce with determination. Harrington had less than a heartbeat to react. The Viet Cong fighter lunged from the reeds with a guttural shout, bayonet glinting as it thrust toward Harrington's ribs. Harrington twisted the blade, scraping across his flak vest with a metallic hiss. He slammed his forearm into the attacker's wrist, knocking the rifle aside, then drove his knee upward, catching the man square in the gut. The VC fighter staggered but didn't fall. He recovered with feral speed, swinging the butt of his rifle like a club. Harrington raised his arm to block the impact, jolting all the way to his shoulder. Pain flashed through him. Before the attacker could swing again, Riker barreled into the man from the side, tackling him into the mud. They rolled, thrashing violently, reeds snapping under their weight. Riker tried to wrestle the rifle free, but the VC fighter clawed at his face, striking, kicking, desperate. A shot cracked Ortega's rifle. The VC fighter went still. Riker pushed the body off with a grunt, chest heaving. "Thanks," he panted, gripping Ortega's shoulder. "No time," Ortega whispered. "More coming." He wasn't wrong. Shadows moved in the reeds, 6-8, maybe more, closing fast. The gunfire from behind had grown louder, nearer, angry, like the jungle itself was tightening around them. Harrington pulled Riker to his feet. Into the channel. Now, the Marines slid down the muddy bank into the narrow waterway, some stumbling into waist-deep water, others crashing onto their hands and knees. The wounded Marine was passed down carefully, his head lolling against Wilcox's chest. The channel walls were steep, 3 meters high, in some spots formed by decades of monsoon runoff, carving the riverbank into jagged layers. Only a thin ribbon of sky was visible above. But the walls provided something the open marsh couldn't: cover. As Harrington reached the bottom, bullets slammed into the earth above him, sending showers of dirt and pebbles raining down. The enemy had reached the edge of the reeds, but their firing angle was limited now. They could suppress, but not eliminate. "Push downstream," Harrington yelled. "Use the walls for cover." The channel twisted sharply to the right. The Marines followed, half running, half sliding through the water boots, dragging through silt. The sound of boots splashing echoed like cannon fire in the cramped space. Behind them, VC fighters shouted orders and scrambled along the upper rim, trying to track their movement. Bullets zipped across the channel, ricocheting off mud walls with wet thuds. Riker pointed ahead. "So the channel widens up there." Harrington saw it, a small clearing where the waterway split around a mound of earth and tangled roots. But something else caught his eye. Footprints. Fresh, not theirs. "Ambush point," he shouted. Before anyone could react, 3 Viet Cong fighters popped up from behind the root mound, rifles leveled downward. "Down, Ortega. dove sideways into the water. The VC unleashed a blistering burst. Bullets chewed into the mud walls inches above the Marine's head, spraying water and grit. Harrington slammed himself against the right bank, returning fire. Riker joined him, firing upward in controlled bursts. Wilcox shielded the wounded Marine with his own body as he crawled toward a small dip in the channel wall. O'Malley hurled a grenade with a desperate, underhanded throw. It bounced once against the root mass, detonated. A column of water debris and smoke erupted upward, the concussion slamming Harrington back into the wall. His ears rang violently. When he blinked the mud from his eyes, the ambushers were gone, either killed or retreating deeper into cover. "Move," Harrington rasped. Before more show up, they pushed forward, leaving the scorched mound behind. The channel wound like a snake, sometimes narrowing so tight they had to go single file, sometimes opening into shallow pools filled with murky brown water. Each echoing shout from above reminded them they were being hunted. Each ricochet reminded them they were still exposed. Each splash of footsteps reminded them their pursuers were closing. O'Malley, carrying the wounded Marine's legs, slipped again. Wilcox grabbed him, straining under the weight. "He's fading," O'Malley said, voice cracking. "We all will if we stop," Wilcox answered. Harrington heard the struggle, but he couldn't look back. He was scanning ahead, eyes sweeping the channel walls, the water's ripples, the broken angles of roots and rock formations. Every shadow looked like an ambush. Every rustle sounded like a rifle being raised. Then, as they rounded another bend, Harrington's heart leapt. A fallen tree lay across the channel, massive, ancient, its wide trunk forming a natural bridge overhead. Beyond it, the channel opened into a wider basin with solid ground and deep brush. "Shelter, temporary, but shelter. Go," Harrington urged. Under the log, the Marines splashed toward it. As Harrington ducked beneath the trunk's shoulder, brushing damp bark, he heard a shout above on the ridgeline. Then another, then gunfire. The Viet Cong had reached the channel's edge directly above them. Harrington looked back to see a fighter leaning over the rim, aiming straight down, barrel fixed on O'Malley and the wounded Marine. He was too far for Harrington to reach in time. Too fast, too close. The trigger was already halfway back. The Viet Cong fighter's rifle cracked the instant Harrington lunged forward, but the shot never found its mark. A blur moved between the gunman and his target. Riker. He fired from the hip, his M16 barking 3 furious bursts. The VC fighter jerked backward, tumbling over the rim and crashing into the water near O'Malley in a spray of mud and reeds. "Keep moving!" Riker shouted, voice raw, as he scrambled under the fallen tree. Harrington didn't waste the second Riker had bought them. Into the basin, the patrol splashed out from under the massive trunk and into the open area beyond. The basin, carved by years of flood runoff, was a shallow hollow enclosed by thick vegetation. A narrow trail climbed up its far side toward dense jungle. Cover, elevation, a chance. But behind them, boots hammered the channel walls. More shouts, more movement. The VC were swarming to the fallen tree, preparing to fire down into the basin. Riker Ortega set a rear line, Harrington ordered. "Buy us 60 seconds. Riker and Ortega dropped to prone positions at the basin's entrance, rifles angled toward the shadowed mouth of the channel. Their muzzles flashed as soon as dark shapes appeared through the drifting smoke. Harrington, Wilcox, and O'Malley lifted the wounded Marine again, climbing the sloping basin wall. Mud gave way under their boots, forcing them to dig their heels in and haul the body upward inch by inch. Above them, rounds snapped through the branches. The enemy had reached the lip of the channel. Riker shouted, "Incoming!" A grenade arced high through the air. Ortega saw it first. Greener. The explosion cut him off. The blast hurled both he and Riker sideways, mud erupting in a violent plume. Harrington felt the shockwave in his chest as he dragged the wounded Marine up over a root cluster. "Riker, Ortega, sound off," he yelled. Riker coughed, raising a hand weakly. "Still here." Ortega rolled over, dazed but conscious. "I'm good, I think." More VC fighters began sliding down into the basin. Harrington didn't hesitate. "Wilcox, hand me a frag." Wilcox tossed him one. Harrington yanked the pin, counted a single beat, then lobbed it toward the descending silhouettes. The grenade detonated mid-slope, sending rock, soil, and bodies slamming back into the channel. The advancing line faltered. "Move!" Harrington roared. They climbed as a unit, pushing the wounded Marine to the top of the slope. Wilcox hauled him the last meter, collapsing beside him. O'Malley followed, scrambling on all fours. Harrington turned back toward Riker and Ortega. "Fall back up the slope now." The two Marines rose, firing short, suppressive bursts as they retreated in a crouched run. Bullets shredded the brush around them. A chunk of bark exploded beside Riker's head as he dove behind a root tangle, narrowly avoiding a kill shot. Ortega reached Harrington first, sliding into position beside him. "Sir, we gotta move." "They're seconds behind us." Riker stumbled up last, panting, mud-smeared, his helmet dented from shrapnel. "They're piling in, lots of them." Harrington scanned the jungle ahead. Dense cover, twisting terrain, no clear visibility. But it was their only chance. "This way," he said, pointing toward a narrow game trail barely visible beneath overhanging branches. Wilcox and O'Malley lifted the wounded Marine again. The patrol plunged into the jungle boots, pounding soft earth, breath burning in their lungs. Vines whipped at their faces, branches clawed their uniforms, but every stride put more distance between them and the basin. Behind them, the VC poured over the basin wall, firing wildly into the trees. Bullets hissed through the foliage, some slamming into trunks, others whining off into the jungle. Harrington kept them running until the gunfire began to fade. Until the jungle swallowed the echoes, until only the rasp of breath and the pulse of adrenaline remained. Finally, he raised a hand. The patrol skidded to a halt, collapsing behind a fallen log. The wounded Marine lay pale as paper, but breathing. Riker leaned back against a tree, wiping sweat and mud from his face. "Sir, we clear." Harrington listened. No gunfire, no shouts. Only the hum of insects and the distant rush of the river. "We're clear," he said quietly. "For now." Everyone exhaled at once, the release of tension almost dizzying. Ortega slumped forward, helmet dangling from his fingers. "Damn river," he muttered. "Every damn crossing's a death trap." Harrington looked back the way they'd come, the winding channel, the reeds, the water that had nearly claimed them. He knew Ortega was right. On rivers like the Toubon Danger didn't wait on the far bank. It waited exactly in the middle when you were exposed, helpless, and praying you'd see the other side. The patrol gathered themselves, tending to the wounded, checking ammunition, preparing for the long trek back to friendly lines. They were battered, bruised, exhausted, but alive. Against odds stacked higher than the riverbanks themselves, they had survived the most dangerous crossing of their lives.